Imagine watching hundreds of teenagers tear through a city center, only to hear politicians say the real problem is that these kids just need a summer camp.
Yeah, I mean, it creates this immediate sense of whiplash. You watch these videos of extreme chaos, and then you hear public officials offer a really mild administrative fix.
Right. It's
Like,
wild. And if you follow the news even casually, you know the exact videos we're talking about today.
oh, absolutely.
Your social media feeds are likely full of these incidents. People call them teen takeovers. We see mobs of youth destroy property, block traffic, and just create total havoc in downtown areas from Chicago to Tampa Bay, Florida.
Yeah, store windows shatter, people jump on cars.
Exactly. It looks less like a protest and more like a massive violent block party that, actively targets local businesses.
And people naturally want to know what drives this behavior, right?
Yeah.
Like, how does a city actually stop it before it spreads?
Well, today we are diving into an incredibly polarizing answer to that question. We've got an essay and a long-form YouTube commentary by Brandon Lehman. He's an entrepreneur and real estate investor.
Right, and he tackles these takeovers head on.
He really does, and he leans into a very fierce conservative perspective on some highly sensitive, racially charged issues.
Yes, he does. And I want to jump in right here because we need to make our mission for today's deep dive very clear.
Please do.
We are here to impartially unpack the claims made in this source material. We are not endorsing these viewpoints, but rather breaking down the author's perspective on a very heated debate.
Okay, let's unpack this, because Lehman's diagnosis of these riots challenges almost everything modern city leaders say about crime.
Right. And to see his point of view, we first need to look at the traditional excuses he's trying to tear down.
So let's start with the biggest one, the idea of socioeconomic conditions.
Oh, yeah. The poverty argument.
Exactly. When crime spikes, you almost always hear leaders blame poverty. They point to underfunded schools or a lack of local jobs.
Right. The logic is that if a community lacks resources, people eventually turn to desperate measures just to survive.
But Lehman entirely rejects that specific survival crime narrative when it comes to these mobs, doesn't he?
Completely. He argues that, sure, desperation might force a person to steal bread or diapers to feed their family, but he asks you to look closely at the video evidence from these takeovers.
Yeah, because they aren't stealing bread.
Exactly. He points out that poverty simply does not force a person to loot high-end electronics from an Apple store. Poverty does not make a mob smash a random driver's windshield or, rob a Foot Locker for designer sneakers.
He draws a hard line between a crime of necessity and a crime of thrill-seeking.
He really does.
And he gets exceptionally frustrated when politicians pivot to their secondary excuse, the idea that these teenagers are just, bored.
Yeah, the boredom defense. This is where Lehman directs his harshest criticism.
So he specifically targets the mayor of Chicago, right? Brandon Johnson.
Yes. According to the source material, the mayor actually vetoed a city curfew meant to keep youth off the streets at night.
Wow, he vetoed it.
He did. And instead of a curfew, the mayor argued that the government just needs to give teenagers things to do in the summertime.
I mean, the mayor even brought teenagers to a press conference who claimed they just wanted to escape difficult home lives and have fun.
Right, and Lehman treats that response as a complete failure of leadership. He argues that asking taxpayers to fund entertainment for teenagers just to bribe them into not burning down a city sets a terrifying precedent.
He calls it a shameful admission, right?
He does. He argues that leaning on the boredom excuse reveals something much darker.
How so?
Well, if you believe a teenager will commit mob violence simply because they don't have access to a summer camp, you are basically admitting that those individuals lack a basic moral compass.
Right.
You're admitting they lack personal responsibility. Lehman asserts that a normal, functioning person does not choose to destroy a neighborhood simply because they lack an after-school program.
I mean, I have to play devil's advocate here. I struggle with his logic on this point.
Okay, go ahead.
But if the author completely dismisses poverty and bad home leaves as the root causes, what exactly does he think is driving 12-year-olds to riot without their parents?
Yeah, that's a fair question.
I mean, the source mentions a 12-year-old getting arrested in Florida during one of these events. If it's not a lack of resources, what puts a middle schooler in the middle of a riot?
What's fascinating here is that Lehman diagnoses this as an internal cultural collapse.
A cultural collapse.
Yeah, he believes the primary mechanism driving this behavior is the complete absence of parental guidance.
Okay.
He looks at these videos and sees hundreds of minors running the streets late at night with zero adult supervision. He argues that parents have entirely stepped back, leaving a vacuum.
And I'm guessing social media fills that vacuum?
Yes, exactly. The author outlines how platforms like TikTok and Instagram basically rewire these youth's brains.
Oh, because they watch the chaos of previous takeovers online.
Right. They see the destruction, but instead of seeing a crime, the digital crowd rewards the behavior with views and likes. They perceive the mayhem as exciting and socially validating.
So they consciously decide to organize and replicate that destruction in their own cities.
Exactly. They perform for a digital audience rather
Yes.
than, participating in a physical community.
But he takes this diagnosis a step further, doesn't he?
He does. He claims these participants actively embrace a culture of lawlessness and barbarism. He describes a culture completely consumed with self-sabotage, driven by anger, hatred, and rage.
So he essentially argues that no government program can fix what is fundamentally a spiritual brokenness,
Right. And that internal brokenness forms the core of his next major point.
which is about community programs, right? Because Lehman believes external government solutions fail, you might assume he champions grassroots, community-led programs.
You'd think so, yeah. You might think he wants neighborhoods to heal themselves from the inside.
But he argues those internal solutions are failing just as badly, and he actually uses his own professional failures to prove it.
Yeah, this part was really striking.
Lehman shares that he spent over a decade trying to uplift his local area. He mentored at-risk youth, hosted trade workshops, and even brought kids to his real estate renovations to show them how to work a job.
And then he tried to launch a massive project called the Black Fund.
Right, the Black Fund. The details of this project reveal exactly how Lehman arrived at his current worldview.
He designed the fund to revitalize dilapidated areas from within.
Yeah.
He wanted to provide business loans to local entrepreneurs and host high-level skills training.
But he needed capital. So he pitched this fund to dozens of highly successful Black businessmen, professional athletes, and musicians.
Right.
He asked them to invest their money back into the community, and every single one of them said no.
Wow. Every single one.
Yes, they completely refused to fund the project.
And the reasoning behind their refusal provides this really crucial psychological and economic insight. Lehman claims these wealthy investors told him that putting money into these specific areas is a lost cause.
A lost cause. That's heavy.
It is, but you have to think about this from an investor's perspective. Capital requires stability.
Right, of course.
These investors look at the crime rates, they watch the videos of property destruction, and they see a culture that actively repels growth. I mean, if a business gets looted the week it opens, a business loan just vanishes.
It's like trying to build a beautiful new playground, but the community members keep burning the swings down, and then people wonder why investors start buying swings.
That's a great analogy.
Eventually, the grocery store chains look at the burned swings, or the poisoned soil, and refuse to build a supermarket nearby. People wonder why the area lacks fresh food, but the investors simply see too much self-sabotage to risk their money.
And that self-sabotage is exactly what Lehman highlights. He argues that even the most successful individuals who share a demographic background with these youths recognize the severe risks of investing their own capital.
They refuse to throw money into an environment that embraces chaos.
Right. And then Lehman follows up the failure of his fund with a very dark story about a grassroots event in Illinois.
Oh, the park event. Yeah, a local man wanted to host a positive gathering in a park that was basically known for trouble.
Right, and people warned the organizer to pick a safer location. But he insisted on hosting it there, arguing that you have to bring light directly into the darkness.
So the organizers set up a day of joy and togetherness. They offered food, activities, crafts, and even job training programs.
And for several hours, the event achieved its goal. Hundreds of people attended safely.
But an hour and a half later, the situation deteriorated completely. While families and organizers were still in the park cleaning up the event, gunfire erupted.
Yeah, according to Lehman, local teenagers started shooting at each other right in the middle of the cleanup.
Okay, I have to jump in here and push back on his analytical method.
Okay, what do you mean?
Is it fair for the author to conclude that every well-intentioned initiative is ruined by its own people just based on these incidents? He takes one terrible shooting at a single park event and uses it to declare that soft community responses are totally ineffective everywhere.
Right.
He uses his one failed investment fund to paint an entire demographics efforts as a lost cause. Is it logically sound to build a massive generalization out of a few outlier incidents?
From a purely analytical standpoint, it is a massive generalization. Taking isolated extreme events and framing them as the guaranteed outcome for all community efforts definitely ignores thousands of programs that do work quietly every day.
Exactly.
However, Lehman uses these specific examples to establish his baseline for human behavior.
What do you mean by a baseline?
Well, Lehman argues that a community can only heal itself if everyone involved places a basic value on human life and civil order.
Okay, I follow that.
When you deal with teenagers who are willing to shoot at each other in a crowded park full of innocent families, you are dealing with individuals who operate far below that baseline. They have absolutely zero regard for human life.
Right.
Lehman calls the idea that keeping a recreation center open an hour later will stop this level of violence laughably false. He argues that a crafts table does not fix a person who values a digital trend over a human life.
So government compassion fails because it makes excuses. And internal community programs fail because the destructive elements sabotage them.
Yeah, that's his view.
That paints an incredibly bleak picture, and it leads us directly to the final, most severe part of Lehman's argument. He pushes for a drastic, uncompromising solution.
He does. And this is where his perspective becomes highly targeted and historically loaded.
Right.
Lehman claims that a specific group drives this national fatigue. Based on his own observations of the takeover videos and the arrest records, he states that this destructive behavior is almost exclusively perpetrated by black teenagers.
He does not soften his language there at all.
Not at all.
And he issues a severe warning about the historical consequences of this behavior. He argues that if this level of lawlessness continues, the community risks a return to restrictive societal controls. He explicitly references the era of Jim Crow laws.
Yeah, and bringing up Jim Crow is a heavy, deliberate choice. For context, Jim Crow laws were brutal, oppressive systems of legal segregation enacted in the South after the Civil War.
Right.
They stripped Black Americans of basic rights, controlled their movements, and enforced a horrific racial hierarchy.
So why does he invoke something that oppressive when talking about modern teen riots?
He uses it as an extreme warning mechanism about human nature and societal fear. Lehman suggests that society at large will not simply tolerate the ongoing destruction of its cities, beaches, and public spaces.
I see.
He argues that terrified voters eventually demand order above all else. He warns that if a community cannot prove it can self-govern and maintain basic safety, external forces will step in.
And those forces will impose order with an iron fist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Stripping away freedoms to ensure the streets are safe.
So what does this all mean? He essentially says, if you do not police your own children, the state will eventually police you in ways that will set civil rights back a century.
That is exactly his warning.
That is a terrifying prediction. But he doesn't stop at a warning. He demands a specific policy response right now.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, he demands absolute, uncompromising order. Lehman concludes that society must stop searching for root causes and stop making excuses.
Right.
He believes the community must start policing itself aggressively. And for the specific offenders, the youths actively participating in violent mobs, looting, and shootings, he argues the justice system must lock them up forever.
Locked up forever. That stance offers zero room for rehabilitation. No second chances, no youth diversion programs.
None.
And he uses a very specific metaphor to justify this level of permanence. He talks about a horse. We all know the saying that you can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. Lehman says if the horse refuses to drink the water and instead stomps in the water, poisons it, and ruins it so nobody else can drink, you have to get rid of the horse.
And you have to unpack what getting rid of the horse actually means for public policy. Lehman argues that society must physically remove, violent offenders from the ecosystem permanently.
Because he believes the justice system currently prioritizes the feelings and potential of the criminal over the safety of the innocent.
Yes, exactly.
He mentions that progressive critics often label concepts like strict laws, high standards, and meritocracy as discriminatory or unfair.
And Lehman forcefully rejects that criticism. He views the claim that high standards are somehow oppressive as a terrible admission of inferiority.
Okay.
He believes that high standards, personal accountability, and a rigid legal system are not oppressive. They are the necessary tools for any functioning civilization.
If you follow his logic to its endpoint, he believes that showing compassion to a violent mob member is an act of cruelty to the innocent store owner who gets her business destroyed.
Right.
He believes permanent incarceration is the only tool left to protect the people who actually want to live in peace.
Lehman's entire worldview centers on prioritizing the innocent over the guilty, without exception. He demands an end to the sociological debate and a return to strict, punitive consequences.
Man, we have covered a massive amount of intense ground today. Let's zoom out and review the core of what we explored.
Sounds good.
We started with the visual reality of these teen takeovers mobs destroying property, while politicians suggest offering them summer camps. We looked at how Lehman completely rejects the standard narrative. He refuses to blame poverty or systemic marginalization.
Right. Instead, he points the finger directly at an internal cultural collapse. He blames a severe lack of parental guidance and a generation of youths who use social media to glorify destruction.
Right, he argues they choose thrill-seeking over community building.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we explored his deep frustration with internal community solutions. He shared the failure of his own Black Fund, explaining how wealthy investors refuse to throw money at a demographic they view as consumed by self-sabotage.
And he used that tragic park shooting in Illinois to argue that soft programs fail because the offenders lack a basic respect for human life.
And finally, we examined his controversial, uncompromising demand for the future. He warned that public spaces turning into war zones will eventually trigger a terrifying, oppressive backlash from society at large.
Right?
To prevent that, he argues for aggressive self-policing and permanent incarceration for violent youths, removing them from society forever.
Regardless of your own political leanings or how you view the justice system, this source material forces a very uncomfortable conversation into the light.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
It demands you think about the ultimate source of community safety.
Exactly.
Does a safe city rely on the government providing resources and opportunities? Does it rely on neighbors building grassroots programs to heal their own streets? Or does it rest entirely on the individual maintaining a strict moral compass, backed up by the threat of severe legal consequences?
Think back to that initial image. Hundreds of teenagers tearing through a downtown street, breaking windows just for a digital audience. Lehman argues that personal responsibility, backed by a ruthless legal system, is the only way to save those streets.
Yeah.
But it leaves you with a lingering, difficult question. The author argues that personal responsibility is the only thing that can save a community. But it makes you wonder, if a society's foundation is truly broken, can personal accountability alone ever be enough to rebuild it from the ground up?
Yeah.
Or does that approach just manage the collapse?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Something to think about next time one of those videos pops up on your feed.